Well, howdy, product data professionals. We're back once again for IDA Optimized. Today, Eli Cooley is going to talk about category size. Take it away, Eli.
Thanks, Joe. One of the most common questions we hear when we are talking to customers about, how they should be managing and designing their taxonomies or e-commerce hierarchies is, what are the guidelines around the size of categories? How many SKUs is too many? How many SKUs is too few? And it's one of the guidelines that a lot of designers struggle with, and it's a question that we encounter in almost every hierarchy that we design. So I wanted to share today an example of a hierarchy and talk about category size or category item count in the context of an actual example. So this is a sample project here. It's an electronics hierarchy. We can see it's a hierarchy with about 150,000 items in it. That's 150,000 things we need to categorize into the structure. And the question is, as we get down to the leaf categories in this hierarchy, how many items should we be looking to have in each category? And there's usually an average that we're shooting for, and then the variation is extremely wide, because the reality of managing hierarchies, whether it's an attribute management hierarchy that's not, displayed to a website, or whether it's an e-commerce hierarchy, the reality is that some of the categories are going to end up being fairly small in terms of item count, and some of the categories are going to end up being very large. And really, the number one determining factor is, what we want to group together similar things. So, and those things should be differentiatable by attributes. And if we can differentiate between and use the same set of attributes to differentiate a group of products, even if there's 2,000 or 5,000 of the same thing, if they can reasonably be managed and filtered with one set of attributes, then those can live together in one category. And when we have things that are truly different from one another, where they would need their own set of attributes or filters, then sometimes we need to break things into more granular or smaller categories so that the attributes will fit correctly. Because one of the most important things about placing items into categories is that they form the basis for attribute management. So you classify the SKUs to these categories or classify the items. But then one of the other most important things you do with these categories is you have a schema, or you have a list of attributes that you want to use for any product that lives in these categories. So the ultimate answer for how big the categories are going to be is really however big they need to be, so that the attributes or the filters can be built effectively around these products. Now, that being said, and I'm just going down to a branch and some leaf categories here. Here's some audio bags and cases, and you can see that the category size varies pretty widely. I've got smaller categories that are 10 or 20 or 30 items, and then I have a couple larger categories. Here's DJ equipment bags and cases, or 335 items. So, what are the guidelines for when is a category too big or small? It is true that a very large category, you want to be thinking about whether there's ways to break that down. And maybe there are logical subsets there where we can design attributes around smaller groups of products and make it easier to find things and manage information. Sometimes, and also if a category is really small, usually you're thinking about whether maybe it's too small, maybe it needs to be merged together with another category. Another thing to be thinking about when is the more categories you have, the more content you have to create for the categories. And people often underestimate how much work goes into a category. So, there's sometimes a tendency to say, well, let's just make it really granular. Let's have a lot of categories and have them be really small. The problem there is that now you're managing so many different lists of attributes, it's hard to keep them all aligned with one another. You have that many more images that you have to create. You have that many more descriptions that you need to write, that much more metadata that you need to create and manage. So it is possible to go, to create a hierarchy that has too many categories and where the categories are too small. So this is just one example of a layer of a taxonomy. But what I wanted to do is take a look at what does this look like across an entire taxonomy? So here's a report that is just a nice simple one. It's just the number of items per category. And we'll look at this here. And sometimes it's actually easier to see this in a logarithmic scale. So these are there are over 1,000 categories, over 1,100 categories in this taxonomy. And we can see here it ranges anywhere. There's a bunch of categories that have no items in them. And then it's a distribution where there's a fair number of small categories where there's less than 10 items. There's a lot of categories that have between 10 and 100 items. And all the way up to our largest category, which has 2,659 items. That's a huge category for printer paper. But if you think about it, and let me go to I'm going to put a couple filters on here. So maybe we only want to look at the leaf categories or terminal categories. That gives us a slightly different picture. And then maybe I just want to look at the table view. So let's look at the largest categories here. I'll move this over. And let's just start with the first one, printer paper. There's a really, we might not need to break this down and make this more granular. Printer paper, every type of, every SKU that's printer paper might have very similar attributes. And if we have this many SKUs of printer paper, maybe we just have a really large category. That's probably the case here. Phone cases are another good case. There's 2,600 phone cases. I'm sure there are lots of different ways that phone cases get made with different sizes and adapting to different models and different colors and materials. But ultimately, probably all the phone cases can live in one category and be managed by one list of attributes. So these are the biggest category item counts in the hierarchy, and these aren't necessarily bad. But we would typically be thinking about whether we can break these categories down any further. And we would definitely be thinking about what are the attributes that users could leverage in order to filter within these categories. So even though we have 2,700 items in printer paper, we probably want to have more attributes for users to filter on if we have this many SKUs that they're going to have to be searching within or trying to find items within. On the other end of the spectrum, there's going to be some categories that have almost no items. Like here I have 3D printers has one item. I think it would be, maybe they haven't really started selling 3D printers yet. Maybe there's just one item in there. And, sometimes that you're going to be growing into a category. So a category is there in anticipation of more products in the future. But sometimes, if we only have one 3D printer and we're never going to have more, maybe we don't need a category for 3D printers. We'd want to be looking at revenue. We would want to look at some other factors to determine whether a small category needs to be merged in with another or possibly just removed altogether. But any small category is really being questioned. Its entire existence is being questioned. So that's just a real quick view of category counts and some of the things to be thinking about. There's really no category is too small, no category necessarily is too large, but it's something we definitely want to look at. And it's something, one more thing I'll show here is that when you roll these things up by, let's roll it up by L2. That report doesn't work here. Okay, oh, it's because my terminology. Hold on one second. There we go. So if we look at the way this rolls up to L1s, you can see that it really does vary pretty widely across categories. Let me get this thing looking right here. So we can ignore this new SKUs one here. But lighting and studio has an average of 307 items. Lens filters, an average of 300 items. Printers and scanners. So there's certain categories that are going to tend to have larger category counts. If we look at the other end of the spectrum, films and darkroom, it's only 29 items per category. And that's because these items aren't quite as iterative. There aren't as many size permutations and color permutations. These tend to be more distinct, discrete items that don't have a lot of permutations. And so that tends to be when you start rolling this up. But it is interesting. The average category in films and darkroom is 1/10 the size of the average category in lighting and studio. And that might be valid. There really are differences in the way that these products fit into categories. And another important thing to remember is that if you're watching, workflow in these categories, you're going to, a lot of work gets done category by category. And when you have categories that have lots of SKUs in them, naturally the categories take longer to work through. So whatever we're doing, if we're building attributes, if we're doing quality assurance on descriptions, it could be anything. Any task that you're building on a category basis is going to take longer to work through when the item counts are higher, typically. So it's just something to think about. If we're watching two teams work on a similar task, the lighting and studio team might take a lot longer to get through that task or to get through the same number of categories as films and darkroom, just because they're dealing with more stuff. Joe, that's what I've got for today. We'll dig deeper into some of these concepts in the context of design choices and decisions in upcoming sessions. But for now, that's our high-level overview of category count in a hierarchy.
Super, Eli. I did have a question. One thing struck me during your presentation when you said that the more categories you have, the more content you have to create. Then it led me to think about the people behind the creation of the content. So I'm wondering, is there any general guideline that can help a business align the volume of content to the volume of people they need to produce it? That's a hard question. That's a big question, and there's probably no scientific answer, but is there some guideline you might lean on based upon your experiences?
Yeah, one of the things to think about with category, I'll bring this back to categories, is that in terms of the number of people you need, it's important to think about how long it's going to take to work through all the categories. And if you're estimating a task and you're doing some random sampling or piloting, make sure you use some large categories and some small categories in your random sample. So make sure it's kind of a stratified random sample where you have large categories and small categories so that you can really truly estimate how long something's going to take, because a disproportionate amount of the time is typically spent if the work is SKU level or attribute work. It's going to tend to those tasks are going to take a lot longer when you're dealing with a large category. Some of the content work, though, is approximately equal per category. So if you think about creating an image or creating a description for a category, approximately it's going to take the same amount of time per category. So some of the tasks are going to be it takes this much time per category, and that might still be a reason to be stingy with categories and not have a bunch of small categories. But then other tasks are going to be more dependent on how many items are in the categories. So when you're doing attribute work, or you're doing data fill work, or you are cleaning up descriptions, or cleaning up data errors, or preparing something to be published into a table view, these things are going to take a lot longer when you're dealing with a large category.
Well, there you have it, folks. Not all categories are equal. That concludes today's episode of IDA Optimized. Remember to like, share, and comment, and we'll see you down the road.
Thanks, Joe.